Hey everybody, welcome to Flick and Reel, your friendly neighborhood fancast. We are your source for news, reviews, and daily discourse. I am your host, Jesse Swift. On today's show, I am joined by Scott Fox.
Good morning, guys.
And today we are going to be talking Wonder Woman. But before we do, I want to ask, are you on the go and barely sitting long enough to watch a podcast? Don't worry, we have you covered. You can also find us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Breaker, Pocket Casts, and Radio Public. All that you have to do is search Flick and Reel and give us a follow on whichever platform works best for you. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into our main and only topic, and that is Wonder Woman 84. We both watched Wonder Woman yesterday on HBO Max because it was doing a day and date. Part of Warner Brothers' new movement with theaters and HBO Max. And we want to share some of our first spoiler-free impressions. Scott, are you ready to dive into this?
Let's do it.
All right, Scott, the first thing I want to bring up, because going into the film I thought it was the most important, is the direction. Because I think both of us really greatly enjoyed the first Wonder Woman in 2017, and also directed by Patty Jenkins. And I think no matter how we felt about the trailers or anything that we've heard about, whatever, the main thing, kind of driving force, is that it was Patty Jenkins coming back. So we're pretty sure we're going to get the same level of quality. How did the direction come across for you in this installment?
I would say pretty good as a whole overall. I want to. There are some things that you can pick in this movie and kind of peel apart at it, but overall, I think the direction was good. My only frustration is the places where, with the direction, there were emotional scenes. They were really forced. They tried to almost build the emotion for you to make you want to feel those emotions. But for me, none of it actually connected. Like I was invested in the movie, but at the same time, the spots where the emotion should have been at their peak kind of just were like, wow, they're trying to make me feel this without actually being able to feel this. So
there was a couple different points where I kind of marked it, and I was like, here's where you're supposed to cry if this movie was better put together, I think.
Literally had the same conversation last night with my wife. Like these moments are the pinnacle moments where I should have been welled up. And I think we both know a couple of spots where definitely should have been welled up. And I just was like, well, Diana Prince is showing some red eyes, but it didn't come through the television to me.
And we were talking about feeling guilty for not feeling feelings almost, because we were so invested in the character in the original film. But before we get to our whole review, I'm not trying to spoil my thoughts on whether I liked it or not, because we got a little bit farther to go. But I think I share some of your sentiments with the direction. I don't know if Patty Jenkins wrote it or not.
Yes, it's co-wrote Patty Jenkins and Jeff Johns.
Okay, interesting.
But again, a lot of that can be editing as far as the emotion. There's the fine line between hitting that peak perfectly, because you have to add in the sound, the visual, the dialogue, everything, and then the soundtrack, the music reaching that peak point when the emotion's there can help push it over. It didn't all just come together.
Well, I think we could bring runtime into the equation, like we were talking about early on. I thought pacing-wise, I had almost no problem with the first Wonder Woman film. I thought it clipped along at a really good pace. Despite how I felt about the third act, I think we got to it and through it at a good speed. And I was very tired. I had a long day. So maybe some of it was cranky grouchiness, but I think that it drug hard. And that we have to attribute that typically to the direction and how.
Yeah, totally. After watching it 2 hours and 31 minutes, and granted you take out about 7 minutes of credits, it felt like 2 hours and 31 minutes. There's a good chunk of movie where I'm not sure where. I would say it's little bits in many places that were unnecessary. Maybe some scenes that were drug on just for effect. But they really did again, without wanting to get into spoilers or anything, there were certain places where the movie was stretched, and I think total runtime really did kind of almost build fatigue.
There was this weird. I don't want to use the word balance because it's kind of the opposite, but we had so much that was vague, but also there's too much. So there's a lot that really felt like it lacked. I don't want to say exposition, but some explaining, some talking through. Like some things just happened, and they caused confusion. So they spent time on things that didn't need to happen. I feel.
Yeah, there were things in the story that didn't help the plot or the storyline as a whole. They were good for the movie as far as like, like, okay, so it's set in 1984. I was born in 81, and while this is early in my childhood, a lot of the 80s feel was definitely there throughout the movie. I love that, but I think a little extra time was put into really trying to paint the picture of the fact that this is the 80s, and it's like, all right, we get it, it's the 80s. Like,
I think that'll wrap up for my last point about direction is that this movie is called Wonder Woman 1984 or Wonder Woman 84. I don't know what the point was. I guess watching the film, I don't know what the driving force for making it an 80s film was. I don't know what the impact was or the creative choice.
For me, the goal with that was to separate it from the rest of the DCEU. So they do it in 1984. Well, then it doesn't have to jive with any other storylines or anything because it's predating all the other stuff, which separates it. But then at the same time,
I still think they still broke canon or managed to, and we'll get that into some of the spoiler stuff. But there's things that even separated by like 30, 40 years breaks the DC continuity.
Yeah, I'm not gonna totally. Then you have to. I actually started doing the math. I'm like, okay, when was Batman v Superman? How old was Batman? Where is Bruce Wayne right now?
I thought about it. I was like, is baby Bruce walking around?
Like, yeah. Clark Kent should be in Kansas right now. I was having those thoughts thinking about it, and
me too.
It's not. It wasn't bad, but it certainly. I think the 1984. Literally, you could have taken this movie out of 1984, and apart from costume changes, inserted it now. The only thing it did was tie in some global tensions with Russia and America, with the nuclear, the Cold War stuff. They tied in a lot of that, which if anything, kind of gives a background, be like, oh, maybe this is the reason the tensions were so high, is because all this stuff happening in this movie. That's really the only connection, but those kind of tensions can be built in almost anywhere. And so the 84 thing really was more of a nostalgia type move to I guess break out a fanny pack.
Look at this pretty colors. Okay, with that, I want to move on to the acting. We have Gal Gadot returning, Chris Pine, which we'll get into more so, but Pedro Pascal and Kristen Wiig as Cheetah, and I think those are all the main players.
Yes, those four are the key characters for the movie.
Okay, and I think I want to save Diana for last. So let's go into some of the newcomers here. I want to talk about Kristen Wiig because going into the film, right from the casting, I'm familiar enough with Cheetah that a puzzled feeling, I guess, would be a good expression for the casting of Kristen Wiig, who I love. I absolutely love Kristen Wiig, but it seemed like an odd choice, both as Barbara Minerva and Cheetah. How did you feel about the character? Without getting too much spoilers.
To be honest, I really like. I think she did a good job. I like Kristen Wiig. The one thing that really jumped out is my wife pointed this out is early in the movie there was a sense of being forced. The word forced is where I fall with this movie. Everything kind of was pushed. And with Kristen Wiig, she went from bright bubbly colors to one scene later, black. And my wife even noted in one of the early scenes with Max Lord at the gala, we go directly to a Diana wearing white and Kristen Wiig or Barbara wearing black. And my wife goes, wow, that's subtle. Like not even a lapel that had a different color. Like it literally was
Is
black versus white, and they
is
did
she the bad guy?
the foreshadowing was forced. Like they were planting things in the movie that made you feel like, okay, these things are coming up. Kristen Wiig, the transfer from her being Barbara to Cheetah, I thought the gradual build to it and the way they showed the transition, the way that worked was really good. And I think um, the neurotic, bubbly Kristen Wiig in the beginning felt more natural, and then it was forced. Like I'm trying to play myself up to be a tough person, but I did like the way she was portrayed, and I thought Kristen Wiig did actually a really good job. If there's anybody I really did feel for, it was probably Barbara, um, because of the fact that she so desperately wanted to not be who she was. Uh, and so
Um,
I did gravitate to her character a little bit more than maybe the others.
um, I have several issues with the handling of Cheetah just from a comic perspective. There's a lot of things that were kind of left in the dust for the sake of convenience. They really changed the arc of the character and how she got to be in that place. But we're talking about the acting here, and I think Kristen Wiig did, I would say, fine for me. But I think a lot of the issue with her character is some of the dialogue. There's a lot of moments in this movie, whether it be dialogue or plot lines, where it actually felt like a movie that minus some CGI would have been made in the 1980s, and so a lot of it didn't feel like it held up to snuff with our current film quality and cinematics. But so I think she suffered from the character development was there, but it was almost a caricature. In a less extreme degree, she reminded me a little bit of Electro in Amazing Spider-Man 2, but not as grating. So I liked her. I wish there would have been some different handling. But that's all my thoughts about Kristen Wiig. I'd like to go on to they bury this in the trailer a little bit, but the main villain is Maxwell Lord, played by Pedro Pascal.
Yeah, I read a thing online that talked about Pedro Pascal stealing the show for the movie, and it was one of those things. When I heard that, I was like, really? Uh, and then I watched the movie, and because to be honest, I didn't really even know he was in the movie until I went to go watch it, and I read that comment. And once I read the comment, I was like, okay, well, let's see what happens here. And he is dynamite. His desire to be more than who he is, and how it pushes him to do things he wouldn't normally do. I wish they had elaborated more on his backstory as far as how he got into figuring out this stone and everything. It's a little too convenient and cheap plot line to just find that he'd been looking it up online, like, or basically, but in the 80s, like he had a picture of it on his desk.
Yeah, look at the opening for Shazam, how they did Dr. Savannah, and they very clearly showed you that this had been his life mission.
Correct. And with we do get we get a flashback for him late in the movie that helps you understand why he's so desperate for power. That might have been helpful at the beginning to lay the groundwork for the character, because the character, there's not really, he just seems like a charlatan, and then is just consumed by this desire to do these things. And that we didn't also get a very good elaboration on kind of I don't want to give away spoilers. The way that which the stone works, and the way that the God of Lies kind of built that, and so they kind of roll it out a little bit in the movie, but that's getting on to plot instead of acting. I think Pedro Pascal was fantastic, and I tell you what, by the end of the movie, like he is into it. What's crazy is we never, like, okay, so Pedro Pascal we know mostly currently by Mandalorian, right?
Yeah. Mandalorian and Game of Thrones, I think, are the two popular things.
Yeah, but in this one, like the dynamic is he really gets into that character, and he does a good job. And again, the story between father son, not to mimic Mandalorian, because it's clearly not, but the father son relationship in this movie, I thought by the end that was one of the things that really came together nicely. Not great, but it did come together nicely. Like that relationship with Ascent, again, the emotional thing, I felt like they're trying to push the emotion in this spot. But good. And I thought Pedro Pascal is a really good actor, and I think this actually showcased him more than any of the other works I've seen him in.
It's one of those things where I can never get enough Pedro Pascal. Every time he's in a project, I get really excited. And I think I do think he was the standout of the film. My girlfriend kept promising over and over again. She's like, "Man, he's just trying harder than anyone else."
Yeah.
I was like, 100%. And if there was ever anything in the movie, one way or the other, that made me feel a glimpse of emotion, I think it was Pedro.
Absolutely.
You talking about feeling bad for Barbara. I felt some sense of empathy for uh, Maxwell Lord as well, which was surprising going into it. I did not expect that, and I think a lot of that is carried by Pedro's performance.
When he's not to get it, I don't want to do any spoilers, but when he's reaching out, trying to connect hands with people, desperately trying to get them to connect with him, to wish, those things, you can see it. Like you feel like he needs this to happen, and he's desperate for it, to the point almost consuming him. He is like it almost swallows him whole, right? And so you're right. As far as the movie goes, I'd say he is well out there as far as the standout of the movie. Whether he stole the whole movie, I don't know, but he certainly was the standout.
And I want to do a little rearranging on how I have the notes set up and save our feelings for the story for last, and that's when we can get into spoilers a little bit. So quickly, I want to talk about the action, maybe lack thereof, how it came across, the effects, what it looked like, some choices. How'd you feel the action was done? And, we don't like to compare movies to movies, but I think you can within a franchise maybe compared to the first Wonder Woman, because there was things that I can close my eyes and imagine the first movie and get chills and goosebumps. I didn't get anything close here.
I hate to say that, but yeah, the Wonder Woman. So I just this week went back and rewatched Wonder Woman, just to make sure my mind was ready with what we were going to be seeing yesterday, and basically doing them back to back. Wonder Woman 1 was just better. I don't want to pinpoint and say here, there, or any of these things. It just as a whole better. The surprise in Wonder Woman 1, and it's now 3 years old plus. When the end comes and you find out who the actual villain is, you're caught off guard. You're like, oh, you knew the villain as far as like the god Ares, but right. Who Ares was certainly caught you off guard. In this movie, you knew who the key players were the whole time.
When they walked in the room the first time.
When there was no surprise. It was the predictability of the plot made the story just kind of feel like, okay, it stole from the peak moments because you knew they were coming.
There's a couple action beats that we see in the trailer, both with the they're not tank, what are they, Humvees on the, is that what they are? Yeah. On the road. And obviously there's the cheetah fight. I felt like through a lot of those, I'd be like nodding, like, okay, this is passable action. And then they'd just do something real corny in the middle of an action scene. And I was like, man, I was really trying to open my mind to the fact that they said, we're trying to go more like Christopher Reeve Superman. And I'm like, I don't need that today. It's one of the reasons Superman Returns didn't work, is they tried to redo a 1978 film in tonally and put it in 2020. And I'm like, it's not that entertaining to me anymore. And I think the action suffered from a lot of that. But this movie, like we brought up before, it's 2.5 hours long. And I guess you could say the mall scene's kind of an action scene, but it didn't really feel any sense of tensity. So at most, there's like 3 action scenes, I think, and they're not invigorating.
No, they're filler to get you to the next part part of the movie. They're to break what's happening in the sequence in order to, there's an action fight sequence that all dissipates and then that moves to the next portion as everyone has to recover from the fight. The opening sequence, I actually wrote down the music playing in the background of the opening. Of the opening mall scene, beginning of the movie.
Okay, I thought you were talking about Themyscira.
No.
Okay.
No, sorry, not that portion. The mall scene, when she's in the mall scene and having the, it shows her kind of going around helping save people, but also trying to keep it a secret, which, again, we could talk about that later. The music playing in that moment literally sounded like a blend of Wonder Woman's natural sound, or the soundtrack for Wonder Woman, blended with a Superman John Williams theme. It literally felt like they were trying to build the Superman-esque feel in that sequence where she was fighting crime. And I sat back on the couch like, they're really going for the Superman vibe with this.
Yeah.
Which also resonated later in the movie as well in some of the other sequences.
And I think that might be a good point to bring up the music. And this is, what's funny is after Batman v Superman, Hans Zimmer said he would never score another superhero movie. Wow, Hans, it took you like a couple years and he's back. Me and my girlfriend are huge fans of Hans Zimmer. Listen to his scores just by themselves all the time. And his score in this movie is actually, she said she closed her eyes a couple of scenes and just listened. It's like, it's beautiful. She's like, it is an immaculate score. But then she would like open them and look at what's happening on screen. She's like, it's not good enough for this music.
Like I said, when everything, the acting, the directing, the editing, and the music hit is when you get, that's what separates a good movie from an Oscar caliber movie.
Right. Okay? That's why certain things work in the Star Wars universe, is because they're just hitting all of it at once. Or Man of Steel for us, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Man of Steel has those moments. This movie, again, the music, early in the movie, I totally felt the Superman vibe via the music and how it interlaced with Wonder Woman. It was good. The movie had some things in it that were really good quality. I feel like for myself, and I don't want to get too far ahead, it's just all these pieces not lining up. You know, there's no synchronicity with it.
And then, so after music, I want to do our feelings on the story. Maybe this would be a better time because I kind of left them out of the initial conversation. We talked about our villains, but we have to talk about Diana and Steve. And I think that's kind of the core centerpiece of the film. So we're just going to tie that in with how we felt about the whole story. And for anyone listening, from here on out, this is your spoiler warning. For the video, I'll try to put a spoiler tab up in the video in the corner or something, just so you guys know. But we're going to do a quick recap of what the story is about. We're in 1984 with Diana Prince, who, as Scott said, is in hiding, at least to some degree. You know, people see her, but it's not common knowledge that there is a Wonder Woman. And then we get introduced to Barbara Minerva and Maxwell Lord, and their paths get crossed. Maxwell Lord is on a mission for, I believe they call it the Dreamstone a couple times in the movie.
Yeah, something like that.
And if there's another name for it, we're going to go with that for all intents and purposes. And so they are both on a mission to better themselves or better their lives, and that puts them in direct conflict with Diana. And kind of an off-the-cuff comment or wish that Diana makes ends up bringing Steve back in an unexpected way that was not shown in the trailers. So I just want to stop for a second. How did you feel about what they did with Steve Trevor and how they wrote him back into the film?
I think the way they brought him back, fantastic. Unfortunately, I literally, after he came back, I turned to my wife, said what was going to happen by the end. And are we in the spoiler zone?
Yes, this is all spoilers.
I said they're going to bring him back to life. Everyone's going to make the wishes. It's going to go terrible. She's going to have to kill Steve or get rid of Steve and give him up in order to be able to fix everything. So she's going to have to choose between him and saving the world.
Because the foreshadowing is so heavy right in the beginning. They're like, no cheating, Diana, no shortcuts.
Oh my gosh, it was one of those things. And they did do a good job of laying the groundwork for truth early in the
Mm,
movie, but then it disappeared all the way until the end. And they only really talked about it as far as like the God of Lies made that stone. And so the lie is it will give you what you want, but you don't know what it takes. And then the whole Steve arc, I loved how they did it, but again, super predictable. And the emotion of the moment when they have to break apart, incredibly forced. And that's directing.
yeah,
That scene, they were trying to gush, holding hands and trying to say I love you and goodbye and all that, and it was so heavily pushed. And it was one of those things where I'm like, man, this should have been a better moment. And I almost feel like if she had done it without the face to face, like in the midst of a battle, just had to like look over to him, recognizing he needs to go, let it go, and then move on and let him die,
yeah,
or go away. He's already dead. That's the whole point.
yeah,
And but that I loved what they did. The execution fell short for me with the story, but it was so predictable. I mean, it was literally the cheap plot trope that like poor writing does as a filler. You know,
yes. I agree with that 100%. And what was one of the most disappointing things for us watching is that Steve and Diana are the core of the first movie, and a lot of the reasons why it works is their relationship and how it carries on throughout the film. In this movie, I am struggling here with Kat. I immediately found myself not being invested and waiting to become invested. And I was like, this shouldn't be hard. I should be able to just emotionally pick up from where we left off. But all the moments that they shared and the scenes that they had together, I was still waiting for the part of the movie for me to be interested in. And that was kind of soul crushing for me because I remember after I saw the first movie, I said, I think this is the best relationship I've ever seen in a comic book movie. And I think that's up for debate, but that's how I felt. And this one, it was almost Jane Foster and Thor for me. And I was like, yikes.
they tried to lay the groundwork of how much she had missed um, Steve in the ensuing 70 years from his disappear or his death. And it's one of those things you're like, oh man, you wanted to feel, but they didn't do a good job of connecting how much she really missed him. They planted seeds, but I
Right.
didn't feel it. And so when he came back, when she's trying to play up that she misses him desperately and she doesn't want to let him go because it's been the thing missing from her life for so long, it's one of those things that are just like, okay, I guess, but it didn't really um it emotionally just was a miss. And I did like what Chris Pine did with the role again, reprising it. Um, and he knew what needed to happen early. Like he spotted it, and he's like, "You have to let this go. You have to give up on this wish." And she was adamant there has to be another way, but you could see it coming a mile away. Actually, you could see it coming an hour and 30 minutes away.
And it just the how much she missed him and wanting him back didn't feel like a strong enough glue to hold the movie together because
No.
uh, they're kind of saying the whole point or message of this movie is for her to let Steve go. And I was like, it's been over 60 years since he died, and she has a new life. Things like romantically, she hasn't moved on, but you can tell in Justice League she never does. So it's just like I didn't see the point for the message of this film. For Diana's character arc felt like a non-story. And so by the end of the film, you're kind of feeling like you wasted 2.5 hours of nothing strong enough to leave an impact on either the character, the overall like DC story or Wonder Woman story, or the audience watching.
When you walk away from the movie, you're not carrying the weight of anything. There's also not a sense of relief that it all came together. There's no. I've walked out of movies feeling like grief,
Sure.
like, and then at the same time also walked out of movies feeling overjoyed. This movie I walked out of going, I might watch it again.
And we've been looking forward to this for almost like 2 years.
Oh my gosh! And maybe that's the problem is the buildup. It's also trying to live up to the first one, which was pretty well received and it did a pretty good job. But it didn't it didn't all work. It just didn't. And as much as we wanted it to, I kept waiting for it to really click. I will say, the action that is there, some of it is fantastic, and it's really well shot. It's really well done, choreographed. It's not overtly excessive CGI, even though there is a decent amount. It didn't mesh just right, and so it's one of those things. I walked away from the movie waiting for or hoping that it would be better. I kept waiting for it to really kick in. Now the action I was talking about. There we go. The sequences, they were good. There was some CGI. The bad part is one of the best fight scenes in the movie was mixed with two of the worst visuals of the movie. Cheetah's flesh. My wife visibly was like, that looks hideous. and then her suit, which was kind of cool. It also was
as a still image.
Yeah, the problem was in the motion of it, and also when she had the wings, basically the wings were just a dome. She closed herself up and was like, I'm going to protect. She didn't use them to her advantage in any way, shape, or form, other than to swoop in and do an initial hit.
Lauren was saying, so this is the armor of an ancient warrior that fought off armies of men, and she let a cheetah just run through it. And I was like, yeah.
Yeah, she was trying not to fight her, so she just waited for Cheetah to punch through it and rip it to shreds. And as Cheetah's clawing at it and mashing it, you can see pieces flying off everywhere. And it was one of those things I'm just like, yeah, that didn't work the way they wanted it to. It looks cool in the image, but it was also, again, they teased that at the beginning, foreshadowing. She has it in the closet at her house, and she reveals to Steve what it is. And you know, because of the trailers, she's going to have to wear it. So it was one of those moments like, okay, at some point she's putting this thing on.
And I think what I really miss is, I mean, I think they said they wanted to, and we'll connect to this in a little bit, but they said they kind of wanted to do an homage to the Linda Carter show, and that was all about, having the lasso of truth, and that was kind of her primary thing. I can't tell you how much I missed the Sword and Shield, and just the hand-to-hand elements that it had on there, instead of her just magical lasso anything. Like, a bullet's getting shot at Steve. I'm going to recognize this in slow motion, whip the whip over there, grab the bullet, yank it out. And then not only, we thought in the trailers, her swinging by lightning was one of the most metal things I've ever seen, but she's grabbing clouds. She's whipping a building that's like 500 feet away or more and just like zipping off into the sky. And then, I'm sorry, just like combine all this together, but she flies. She couldn't 30, 40 years after that.
The fact that she figured out the flight, and
I knew it was going to happen.
Now I will say, the fact that she used the lasso in the tornado effect to throw forward and then launch herself forward so she could pick up speed for flight.
That works.
There were some cool elements that we saw the lasso do things that I didn't know the lasso could do. Splitting in half to tie up two people at once, then whipping it back. In the mall scene, there were just a lot of little things that it did. Yeah, the fact that it could reach. It literally was Spider-Man reaching out to where there's no buildings and launching forward from a bridge.
Yeah, just
like what is it? What did that line grab onto? Spider-Man could be in a field, do this, and he'll launch off. But when Wonder Woman did it, it's like, where are we going? And again, we're nitpicking little things about it, but that was her weapon. She got rid of everything else.
Can I tell you the biggest point for us where I think we kind of felt lost as an audience is they were trying to do so much to kind of show off or justify that they're going with this new direction tonally and having a lot of the 80s vibes and stuff. But they're like, hey, you know what everybody wanted to see? Wonder Woman's invisible jet. And I was like, all right, well, there's a couple. Before I get into this, there's a couple things with that. They stopped using the invisible jet in most mainstream things because they gave Wonder Woman the ability to fly. And so they're like, we don't need the invisible jet. This movie gave her the invisible jet and the ability to fly. And I was like, you have made all of this pointless, like one or the other. But on top of that, they're sitting in the jet and she's like, well, how can we disappear from radar? She's like, well, my father used to be able to disguise things and make them disappear or whatever. And I tried it with a coffee cup once and it lasted a couple minutes, but let me just do this Doctor Strange magic here and make the entire jet invisible. I said, what Wonder Woman power is that? And we for the next like 20 minutes, I kept looking at my girlfriend. We would just randomly go. And it was,
They were intermixing things that weren't necessary to the plot. That was total
The sloppy fan service.
yeah, the service. That's what I was fan service where hey, she had an invisible jet. Let's show how it got into an invisible jet. As soon as that came up, I go, oh, they're gonna fly in one of these planes. My wife's like, where's she get all the planes? I'm like, she owns them all. She's like, she's rich. Like, we can't get into all the backstory on here, but she's also 100 years old, or several hundred years old, and there's so many little layers to that. But when they got in the jet and she took off in a real jet, by the way, flying a prop plane during World War I, when planes were brand new, and converting that knowledge to a fighter jet.
It's like Star Wars. I'm a pilot. I can fly anything. I'm a pilot.
Nope.
Nope.
No, nope. It's one of those things where I saw that and I'm like, this is not fly. And he's just flipping switches. He's like, oh, gas, fuel, and he's saying all the right words. I guess I'm not a pilot, so I don't know. But it was total like, I know people who can fly a Cessna. You do not put them in a jumbo jet because the number of switches and everything required to fly that, completely different. And he hasn't. Yeah, let's just move on. It was unbelievable. And then, like you said, they get in there, and then she's like, "Oh, we need to hide from radar." Oop. And then she puts her. There's some moments she's holding the plane in order to keep it invisible, and then other moments she's just like, "I'm relaxing because I don't need to make it invisible." Well, do you need to touch it?
Remember when you tried super hard to do a coffee cup, and now you're just holding this for like possibly hours? You're just making this jet invisible. And with the Steve Trevor plane thing, again. My girlfriend wanted to love this movie so badly. Like, she was more hyped on the trailers than I was. We both loved the first one. But she said, under no circumstance is any pilot, I don't care who you are, driving through the middle of fireworks or flying through the middle of fireworks. And I was like, yeah, it sure is pretty, but man, it's stupid.
But it was invisible, man. It was protect. Okay, we're getting into the deep end on some of these things. So it literally. Just another one of the things that were like an attempt at fan service, too casually thrown in, and then we have powers that are not consistent with her abilities in the other movies. And so you said it earlier that we got some things that threw off canon.
Yeah.
Okay, so what can she do? What can't she do?
Yeah, I think the I say later movie, the earlier movies, but later in like the timeline, it was pretty clear what Wonder Woman's powers are. She's very fast. She's very strong. She's pretty invulnerable. She's a more grounded Superman, which is how I've always kind of viewed Wonder Woman. She's more hand-to-hand combat, not laser beams and stuff like that. But we didn't get the hand-to-hand combat here. She just whipped everything.
I even told Shauna, well, she didn't have to punch anything up until she fought Cheetah. And even fighting Cheetah, she did not punch Cheetah at all. She was trying to protect her. I told Sean, I'm like, she's essentially the Hulk who can jump extreme distances but can't actually fly. Right. And then 5 minutes later, she was flying.
I was able to take gliding, like she could slower descent or whatever, but All right, so let's go maybe and move into the culmination, because we're doing like the Maxwell Lord and Cheetah wrap ups and characters and how we felt that character arc went. Because as much as I love Pedro Pascal's performance and I do like Kristen Wiig a lot, the end felt maybe like the peak of the hamminess, and I was pretty disenchanted and removed from the storyline at that point. But I want to know what your feelings were.
At that point, I resigned myself to the fact that the movie was what the movie was. Kristen Wiig's wrap up and how she settled back into basically being Barbara, except for with heavy black eyeshadow, and I was okay with it. Okay, the hamminess of it, Kristen Wiig's character just kind of fell off, and emotionally you're like, oh, that's sad for her, but you're not really tied to that character anymore. What's gonna happen to her is, and it's disappointing because now also there's no Cheetah, and with Max Lord, I love the connection back with his kid. I love that he was finally honest about stuff, and
it was cool they didn't have to kill everybody off.
Correct. Yeah, that would have been disappointing. But hey, what about the fact that this guy's now going to be culpable for billions of dollars in damages?
Oh yeah.
Also, how come the nukes all went away, but everything else that he did didn't just magically disappear? There are certain things that he did that corrected as soon as the wish was forgiven, or uh,
Renounced.
he renounced his wish. So many people renounce them, and a lot of things go back fixed, but then yet there's debris and other crud everywhere. So it's like, well, the wishes go away, but then the actions of the humans don't. That's one of the things I'm like, okay, well, did they only launch the new nukes that he wished for, or did they not launch any of the ones that previously owned? Which ones come back, which don't? There's a lot of holes in that.
There's a lot of convoluted elements, I think, in the movie throughout. I agree with your sentiments on the final act. I don't have that much more to add other than the fact that the climax is resolved by Wonder Woman having a lasso tied around Maxwell Lord's ankle and then just talking through him through the projector, which I thought she wrecked the monitor or projector, but yet everyone was hearing it, so I guess it wasn't destroyed. It all felt, I think she was wearing plot armor throughout the movie, and she was using plot weapons that have no rules. They're as vague as can be, and whatever they need them to do at any given point is exactly what they were able to do. All right, so we experienced some technical difficulties, so if there's a little chop in the podcast, I apologize. But we were talking about just the continuity breaks between this movie moving into the current timeline, I would say, of the DC universe. Because even though Wonder Woman movies have never tied very closely, it is still part of it. And I feel like the ability of her flying, this big event that happened with Maxwell Lord, with the wishes happening, you think that would have been referenced at some point. It's like, hey, remember when like we were on the verge of nuclear war and there was riots in the streets across all the countries and walls came up and disappeared? And I was talking about how it really related to Superman 1978. And in that way, it was because in the 1978 movie, Superman, when all these bad things happen, he flies around the world, and spinning it on its axis the opposite direction causes time to go backwards. And then I think he stares the Great Wall of China back into existence. And that's what this movie felt like, is they were making those kind of reaches with the abilities of Wonder Woman. And maybe it wouldn't have been so jarring if this was the first time we ever saw Wonder Woman, but because we've seen her in 3 other movies, it just didn't sit right.
No, there was a lot of flaws with it, just to be honest. The fact that, and with the continuity, like what wishes went away, what wishes didn't, when they were renounced. There was just a lack of consistency in what did and didn't work, in what power she did and didn't have, what the lasso of truth can and can't do. And they really leaned heavily with truth being the thing. That was her only weapon, basically the entire movie. And then even when she put on the extra armor, her weapon was still the lasso of truth. And so there's, there were some issues, some huge issues with the consistency of the story and the continuity of it. So yeah, that was one of my biggest frustrations. I just felt like they're doing whatever they want. Not to say, and I hate to say this against Jeff Johns or Patty Jenkins, but it felt like lazy writing.
It did. In the words of Deadpool, well, that's just lazy writing.
Yes.
Because they're like, well, what is
Please
Diana...
don't give me a green CGI suit.
Yeah. What did Diana need to do in this scene? Well, this needs to happen. Cool. I think the lasso can do that. Oh, can it? Today it can. And so I think before we get into our overall, maybe just numbered reviews or overall reaction to the film, I think I want to take a brief second to talk about the mid-credit scene, which I had read about close to a week ago. I couldn't keep myself away from it. I was like, what's the mid-credit scene? I've been waiting over a year for this movie. I want to know. And they said it's Linda Carter playing a character called Asteria, I think. And it's kind of like a wink, literal wink and the nod to the camera about like, hey, remember when I was Wonder Woman? And I was like, that's cute. and then I saw it, and I was like, this doesn't work on any level. Like, this was the tip, this was the nail in the cheesy coffin, and I was just like, wow, it didn't need to happen. And she's just walking around in like a blue robe, and you can see that she's got like the ankle armor on underneath it, and I was like, I don't know what's happening here.
I think it might have even had a wrist cuff on.
Yeah, she did.
But she catches the falling beam with one hand and puts it back up. And it's just about using lever. Used the same line as everything else earlier in the movie about how Wonder Woman talks to Barbara about how she fought off the guy using his leverage against him.
Yeah.
It was okay. But with the end credits thing, it's fine. It works as far as just paying homage or paying homage to Linda Carter and her role as Wonder Woman. Always cool to see some fan treatment and things like that. Wasn't necessary. It didn't do anything to lay the foundation for another movie or to do anything like teaser going forward. I was excited when I saw it. I told my wife, "Oh my gosh, it's Linda Carter," and she goes, "What?" It's like Linda Carter was Wonder Woman in the TV show back in the 80s. She's like, "Oh, okay." And then my wife goes, "Oh, so she's the eyes?" I'm like, "What? No, she's the lady who was in the suit." And she goes, "Yeah, all you could see was her eyes. So she was the eyes." I was like,
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you for the oversimplification of the statement, but yes, that's who Linda Carter was. And it was okay. It didn't do anything to help. It didn't hurt. A little cheesy.
It was like the equivalent of the Howard the Duck cameo in the first Guardians of the Galaxy at the end.
Correct.
You're like,
okay. The Howard the Duck cameo in Endgame was actually better. Just one of the 5 million people in the battle versus Thanos. So it wasn't terrible. It wasn't great. It was cool to see, and I'm glad they. I like a little bit of fan service. I think it could have been better, but they were trying to play it up as though it was Gal Gadot walking there with the hair, the way she looked, and everything. But clearly Linda Carter, which was okay.
Yes. It's funny. I almost I turned the movie off with a gumption. The second the scene ended, I said, "All right, that's it," and I hit the power button. I was like, "That's the movie."
Yep. So overall effect, though.
Let's just go out of 10. Seems to be the score that most anyone can relate to or take things from. What do you got for me, Scott?
All right. So I have to explain this slightly.
Okay.
And I went with a 6.9. And I need you to hear me out when I say this, because it's higher than a lot of the scores online are getting.
Right now, I just hear Bill and Ted go, 6.9, dude.
The reason being is that I feel like a 6.5 does a disservice to the movie. It's too low. But then I feel like a 7.0 is too high. And so I went with the 6.9 because it's as high in the sixes as I could go without giving it a 7. And overall, my problem with the movie that we haven't listed already is literally, it was the most predictable movie I've seen in a long time. I guessed the entire plot line a half hour in, and some of it I guessed in advance just because I'm a fan and I follow movies, and I could guess where it was going. They jumped into the whole Wish thing within minutes, and it was really rushed. And then we talked about it. The movie felt rushed the entire time, but then was also slow, which is a weird dynamic.
It was in a hurry to go nowhere.
Yeah, very much so. But the idea that it was it is entertaining. It's got great visuals. The action sequences, while they're limited, some of them are pretty cool. Some are a little hokey in the midst of a really cool action sequence. But I'll get off track. 6.9 because 6.5 is too low, but it doesn't warrant a 7. I don't want that 7 on there because that puts it into a different echelon. And it's not there.
Yep.
Yeah.
More in the fresh, and it feels a little less than fresh.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, I felt called out because you're 6.5 is too low. I was like, well, that's 6.5 is where I'm going. Because to me, I kind of the same mentality. I was like, 7's generous and 6 is harsh. So I'm landing in 6.5. Because I was trying to compare what's the last movies I saw that I'd give about a 6. I'd give like Suicide Squad a 6, and I think I like this more than Suicide Squad, but maybe that's because I already liked Wonder Woman and Diana. And
6 is high because for Suicide Squad, by the way. I think this movie got hurt by Wonder Woman.
Yeah,
the original.
Well, I think this movie is hurt by everything else that involves Diana. I think maybe if this was the only Wonder Woman movie and I was just excited to see Wonder Woman, I'd be like, oh, maybe 7.5. Maybe. And maybe that's not fair, but it's fair or not. 6.5 and 6.9 is where we're going. So we average somewhere around like 6.75, something like that.
That's probably the more accurate rating.
Which is
that 6.7.
Pretty in line with, what is it? The critics on Rotten Tomatoes is really close to that. It's like 68%.
Yeah, Rotten Tomatoes has it at 6.3 on IMDb and 67% for the critics on Rotten Tomatoes. Fans have it at 74.
So
I can't see a 74. If you were to break that down to the tenths, it's 7.4, and that's just too high for this movie.
We do have to remind ourselves of Rotten Tomatoes. It's not that they're giving it like a 7.5. You either give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down, or recommend or would not recommend. So that means 74% or 60 whatever percent is how many people gave it a positive review. And I'm on the borderline. Like if someone's like, would you recommend it? Would you not? I'm like, I'm not sure.
If we're doing that, I'm ambivalent. It's whatever.
Yeah.
It's worth the watch. It's entertaining, but this would be a movie, I'll be honest, if I had spent $20 or $30 to buy it on Blu-ray or to go to the theater, I'd be like,
100, like you say, when you bring the family.
Yes, because I have a huge family. If I had spent the money to take my entire family to the theater to see this, I'd be frustrated walking out, been like, well, that wasn't worth my dollars. Right. And granted, this might be also a movie that visually would have been better on the big screen.
Perhaps.
And so it suffered from not being able to take in the full visual in a theater. But even places where theaters are open and some of the critics did get to see it on a bigger theater, it still didn't improve the effect.
I gotta say, Warner Brothers was saying one of the reasons they just wanted to get it out on HBO Max and they couldn't wait for all the theaters to open is they're worried about the movie being stale. And here's my last shot at the movie before I wrap up. I think this movie would have been stale 10 years ago. And that's how I feel about it. The story, the plot, a lot of the elements, dialogue, it all feels dated. And I'm not saying 1984 dated. I'm just saying it quality-wise, the movie feels dated. And not by a couple years.
My last thing that I want to say about this movie is this did nothing for the DCEU.
Yeah.
If this movie was never made, the only thing this did to the DCEU is change canon. And I am hopeful they give a third movie to Gal Gadot and Patty Jenkins and give them the opportunity to maybe write this. But this falls in to the vastly large percentage of sequels that did not live up to the original.
And Patty, as we know, will be busy for the next little while. So maybe she might have to come on as a producer or something. But anyways, that wraps up my thoughts for Wonder Woman 84. And hey, you don't have to agree with us. If you have a different opinion, we don't have to be combative about it. Leave it in the comments section down below. If you haven't already, click the subscribe button. And we want to hear from you guys. What did you feel about Wonder Woman 84? Do you want to see another one? Is this diminishing returns? Did you get to go out and see it in theaters? Because we have theaters open in several states. Here in Washington, we do not. So it was the bedroom for us, or living room. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. I've been Jesse Swift and Scott Fox.
Thanks, guys.
All right. So until next time, keep it real. Hey everyone, it's Jesse here, and I just want to share something with you really quick, but it is something that's very important to me. Right now, the Flickin' Real channel is just a couple of guys sitting around speaking geek, but we think it can be more than that. We think that we can grow into a community of fans that come together to share their thoughts and experiences about various types of fandoms. But we'll never get there without your support. So if you could please click that subscribe button and leave us a like. And don't forget, if you want to get involved in the discussion or let us know how we can do better in the future, leave it in the comments down below. We would greatly appreciate it. And thank you so much for stopping by. Click my cartoon face over here to subscribe, or click this video to join in on another rousing discussion. We hope you learned something today and had a really great time. Please join us next week. And remember, until then, keep it real.